On June 26, 1977, inside Indianapolis's Market Square Arena, more than 18,000 fans pressed shoulder to shoulder for what nobody knew would be Elvis Presley's final concert. But hidden beneath the bright jumpsuit and dazzling lights was a truth the crowd was never prepared to face, one that changed how they remembered him forever. The summer air over Indianapolis was heavy with heat, and the city seemed to hold its breath. That night, June 26, 1977, the Market Square Arena glowed with anticipation. Outside, traffic snarled as limousines and station wagons alike inched forward, dropping off fans who had waited hours just to be near the entrance. Inside, the smell of popcorn and beer hung over the concourse. Merchandise tables lined the walls, selling scarves, programs, and photographs of a man whose image had already defined 2 decades of music. More than 18,000 people filled the seats, stretching high into the rafters. Parents brought children. Veterans of his early years sat alongside teenagers who only knew the legend. There was an electricity in the air, the hum of voices blending into a roar each time the house lights dimmed slightly. In the pit near the stage, ushers struggled to contain fans pressing forward, hoping for the chance to touch a hand or catch a scarf. At precisely 10 p.m., the arena plunged into near darkness. A single spotlight cut across the stage, landing on the curtain. Joe Guercio, Elvis's longtime bandleader, raised his baton, and the opening strains of Also Sprach Zarathustra, known forever as the 2001 theme, blared through the speakers. The audience erupted. People screamed, others cried. Flashbulbs exploded like fireworks. Then, from the shadows, he appeared. Elvis Presley, in his rhinestone-studded white jumpsuit, cape hanging loosely at his shoulders, stepped into the light. His once black hair now showed the weight of years, yet the familiar silhouette drew the crowd to its feet. Thousands of voices merged into one deafening ovation. For a moment, it felt like time rewound. This was the same man who had ignited television screens in the 50s, who had filled Las Vegas showrooms in the 70s. The crowd didn't see the fatigue in his eyes, or the way he leaned ever so slightly heavier on each step. They saw the king. He began with CC Rider, his voice booming through the arena. The sound carried confidence, yet behind it, there was a subtle strain, something only the closest musicians could hear. Kathy Westmoreland, his soprano backup singer, would later say that from the very first song, she sensed something was different that night. As the set continued, "I got a woman, love me, if you love me, let me know," fans reached higher. Screaming for scarves, he tossed into the audience. A single scarf fluttered into the hands of a teenager who clutched it as though she held a crown. In the back rows, others waved posters and banners. Everywhere you looked, the arena was alive with devotion. Yet, beneath the ovations, an undercurrent of unease stirred. Elvis moved slower than usual. His face glistened with sweat only a few songs into the set. He paused longer between verses. For some, these details were invisible, hidden behind the glamour of stage lights. For others, those closest to the stage, those who knew his patterns, they felt a shift in the air. Reflective question: have you ever witnessed a moment where the joy of celebration was pierced by an unspoken worry you couldn't name? That was the quiet tension running through Market Square Arena that night. The crowd didn't yet know what this concert would become. They didn't know it was the last time Elvis Presley would stand before them, cape billowing, microphone in hand. But in small, nearly imperceptible ways, the truth of that night was already unfolding. They would soon realize this night held a hidden truth no encore could disguise. The setlist moved steadily forward, but the electricity in the air had begun to shift. Elvis launched into "Are You Lonesome Tonight?", a song that had followed him across decades, from television specials to late-night Las Vegas encores. The opening chords rang familiar, soft, and intimate, yet there was something fragile in the way his hand gripped the microphone stand. At first, the audience thought nothing of it. The cheers grew louder, drowning out hesitation. When he stumbled slightly, leaning on the stand as if it were an anchor, many mistook the motion for a piece of stagecraft. In the upper balcony, fans squealed, "He's acting," believing it to be part of his charm. But on stage, Kathy Westmoreland, his soprano backup singer, shot a quick look at Joe Guecho, the bandleader. They both knew this was no act. The spotlight caught the sweat gathering at Elvis's brow. His voice, though strong, wavered on the softer notes, stretching to find its usual steadiness. He blinked, gazing past the blinding lights into the crowd, as if searching for a familiar face. What was he seeing in that blur of thousands? Did he sense the weight of their expectation pressing down on him? Reflective question: do we sometimes ignore the signs when the people we admire seem untouchable? How often do we mistake struggle for strength simply because we want our heroes to stay invincible? A murmur passed through the front rows as he faltered again. He chuckled into the mic, trying to disguise the slip. "I'll get it right, honey," he muttered, coaxing a ripple of laughter. The band followed his lead, cushioning the lapse with a gentler rhythm. For a brief moment, it worked. The crowd leaned in, convinced the king was simply being playful. But behind him, the sweet inspirations shifted nervously. One whispered, "He's pushing too hard tonight." Guecho tapped his baton lightly, keeping the orchestra steady. They all knew that if Elvis lost his footing completely, the illusion of invincibility would shatter in front of 18,000 witnesses. The tension built in silence between verses. You could feel the crowd's dual reaction, half swept up in adoration, half holding its collective breath. A fan in the third row recalled later that she had never clapped so hard in her life, as though her applause alone could carry him through. And then came the bridge, the moment every eye and ear was waiting for. His voice dipped, his chest heaved, and instead of gliding through the melody, he paused. The microphone trembled slightly in his hand. A gasp rippled from the front rows up to the rafters. Was he about to collapse? Security shifted at the edge of the stage, ready to rush forward. But Elvis steadied himself, lifted his head, and gave a faint smile. He adjusted the mic, straightened his shoulders, and against all odds prepared to do something nobody expected. Then, right before the bridge, he did something nobody expected. The pause stretched longer than anyone expected. For a heartbeat, the Market Square Arena, home to basketball games and rock concerts, was dead silent. 18,000 people leaned forward as if their collective will could steady the man at the microphone. Elvis wiped his brow with the edge of a scarf, handed it to a fan in the front row, and tried again. His voice caught, low and unsteady, but he pressed forward. To the audience, it was a flicker of humanity from a man they had only known as Lad. To the band, it was a dangerous crack in the foundation. Joe Guecho gestured subtly to the brass section, instructing them to soften. The sweet inspirations adjusted their harmonies, cushioning his voice like a net beneath a falling acrobat. Kathy Westmoreland's eyes never left him. She admitted later that she sang that verse more for his survival than for the crowd's entertainment, but the audience couldn't see the tightrope act happening on stage. From the rafters, all they saw was Elvis pushing through, cape gleaming under the spotlights, his presence undiminished. They roared louder, as if volume itself could hold him upright. Reflective question: what do we do when someone we love shows us their fragility? Do we cheer louder, or do we finally listen to the silence between the notes? Elvis's breathing grew labored. Between lines, he leaned into the mic stand, fingers tightening around the steel pole until his knuckles whitened. One fan near the stage later recalled how her cheers faltered, replaced by a knot of worry. "I thought he was going to fall right there," she said. "But we didn't know if clapping would help or hurt." Security personnel at stage left shifted uneasily, ready to step in. The stage manager whispered into his headset, "Be ready," just in case, but Elvis waved him off with the faintest flick of his hand. Whatever this was, he wanted to face it alone. And then, as though drawing strength from the very tension in the room, he pushed into the chorus. His voice cracked, but it carried. It wasn't polished. It was raw, jagged, filled with something unguarded. The arena erupted in cheers, not because it was flawless, but because it was brave, yet the stakes had risen. Every eye in the building was locked on him, every second stretching longer than the last. This wasn't just another song. It had become a test of will, a battle between the man and his own body in front of thousands. The audience had shifted from passive spectators to unwilling participants in a fragile moment. In the upper decks, some fans clasped hands. In the aisles, strangers hugged, whispering, "Come on, Elvis. You can do it." The roar of encouragement met stretches of silence, so profound you could hear the creak of the stage boards. Contrast hung in the air noise and hush. Faith and fear, pattern-breaker. For the first time, 18,000 people held their breath together. Kathy glanced once more at Guecho. He gave the faintest nod. They all knew what was coming. The transition into the second half of the set. It would demand more from Elvis than the first, and he was already fighting for every breath. Reflective question: how would you react if the strongest figure in your life suddenly revealed his fragility before your eyes? Would you turn away or lean closer? The band fell quiet, waiting for his cue. Elvis closed his eyes, inhaled sharply, and shifted toward the piano. The atmosphere thickened, as if the entire arena balanced on a single fragile note, and then the music shifted into something raw, almost confessional. He lowered himself onto the piano bench with a deliberate slowness, as though every movement carried the weight of a decision. The crowd erupted in applause. This was unexpected. Elvis rarely played piano on stage anymore, but tonight he insisted. His hand hovered over the keys, trembling slightly, then pressed down. A soft chord rang out, fragile yet resolute. The first notes of Unchained Melody filled the arena. The choice stunned even his own band. Kathy Westmoreland would later say, "I didn't know if he could make it through, but he wanted to." For decades, Elvis had been the master of spectacle scarves, jumpsuits, encores. But in this moment, he stripped all of that away. It was just his voice, his fingers, and 18,000 witnesses. His breathing was uneven. The notes cracked. Yet each word carried something deeper than technical perfection. It carried confession. The strain wasn't hidden, it was laid bare for all to see. Short bursts of sound punctuated the verses. He sat, he played, he fought for breath. The imperfections became proof of his humanity, and that truth resonated louder than any polished performance ever could. Reflective question: have you ever heard truth hidden not in words, but in the cracks of a song? That was what unfolded in Market Square Arena. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was testimony. The crowd hushed. The earlier roars turned to reverent silence, broken only by gasps and sobs. Strangers clutched at each other's arms, realizing they were hearing something beyond music. It was as if Elvis was offering them his very last reserves of strength. Note by trembling note, Groucho lowered the orchestra, letting the piano and voice carry. Kathy closed her eyes, harmonizing softly, tears welling. Even the security guards at the stage edge stood frozen, their radios silent. The sound of the piano echoed off the arena walls, intimate despite the thousands of bodies present. And then came the climax. Elvis's voice surge-dragged, but defiant. He lifted his head, eyes closed, jaw set, pouring everything into the final lines. The arena went dead silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Only the echo of one man declaring his truth in song. Pattern breaker. This was no performance. It was testimony. The last chord lingered, vibrating in the air, and Elvis's hands fell from the keys. For a moment, time stopped. Then the arena exploded cheers, sobs, a roar of gratitude unlike anything before. Fans rose to their feet in unison, applauding not perfection, but courage. By the final note, the audience knew they were part of something legendary and fragile. The ovation rose like a tidal wave. People were no longer clapping politely for a show. They were standing in raw, unfiltered awe. Some screamed, others sobbed openly, and many simply raised their hands as if reaching towards something greater than themselves. In that moment, the boundary between stage and audience dissolved. A woman in the 5th row clutched her husband's arm, tears streaming down her face. A teenager, who had begged her parents for tickets months earlier, held aloft the blue scarf Elvis had just tossed. It wasn't fabric anymore, it was a relic. In the upper levels, strangers leaned toward one another, whispering, "Did you feel that? Did you hear it?" The community had been transformed into witnesses of something far more intimate than a concert. Kathy Westmoreland, still holding her microphone, whispered later that she had never seen him fight so hard for a single song. It wasn't about notes, she said. It was about hearts. That truth radiated outward, filling the rafters of the arena and etching itself into the memory of everyone present. Reflective question. Have you ever been in a room where thousands of people suddenly felt like family, bound together by a single fragile moment? That was what Market Square Arena became. Bootleggers, who had smuggled small cassette recorders into the show, captured the trembling chords. The hiss of tape and the occasional cough were preserved alongside a performance that would echo for decades. Those tapes would later circulate like sacred artifacts, each copy proof that the night had truly happened. Meanwhile, the band adjusted, following Elvis wherever he led. The sweet inspirations sang with renewed force, their harmonies carrying him like wings. Groucho's orchestra swelled, then quieted, giving the moment room to breathe. It was as if the entire stage crew understood this was no longer entertainment. It was a reckoning in the aisles. Fans stood shoulder to shoulder, holding hands with strangers. Some bowed their heads, some shouted his name, others simply stood in stunned silence. The roar of applause mixed with the sound of weeping, an unlikely harmony of devotion and grief. The energy was not just emotional, it was spiritual. Elvis looked out over the crowd, eyes glistening under the lights. He nodded faintly, as though acknowledging their part in carrying him through. Then he reached once more for a scarf, pressing it to his forehead before tossing it gently to a child in the front row. That gesture became a symbol. He was giving pieces of himself away. Fragments of a legend shared among those who had come to witness Pattern-Breaker for the first time. The fans realized they weren't just watching Elvis, they were holding him up. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling the close of the set. Yet nobody sat down. Nobody wanted to break the spell. For the crowd, the night had become larger than a concert. It had become a living memory, carried in scarves, in bootlegs, in whispered promises never to forget. But the legacy of that night didn't end when the lights went out. When the house lights finally rose, fans filed out into the humid Indianapolis night, carrying more than programs or ticket stubs. They carried the weight of what they had just witnessed. For many, it was too overwhelming to process in words. They clutched scarves, cassette tapes, and newspaper extras, already knowing they had seen something unrepeatable. Only 7 weeks later, on August 16th, 1977, the news broke. Elvis Presley was gone. The world reeled. Radios interrupted broadcasts. Television anchors choked through statements, and fans wept openly in the streets. And suddenly, the meaning of June 26th shifted. Market Square Arena had not hosted just another show, had become the site of a farewell. Bootleg recordings of Unchained Melody circulated quickly, whispered from hand to hand like contraband scripture. The sound was imperfect, faint echoes, audience coughs, the hiss of tape. But those imperfections only made it more powerful. You could hear the struggle, the rawness, the truth that no studio session could polish away. Fans who hadn't been there leaned close to speakers, imagining themselves in that hushed arena. Local newspapers ran retrospective stories, quoting witnesses who described how the crowd transformed that night. Kathy Westmoreland recalled the tremor in his voice. Joe Guecho remembered the way Elvis waved off security, determined to finish on his own terms. Each testimony layered evidence upon evidence, creating a collective memory that stretched far beyond Indianapolis. Reflective question: how do we choose to remember the last chapter of someone larger than life by their frailty, or by the courage that carried them through it? The arena itself would not survive. Market Square Arena was demolished in 2001, its concrete and steel hauled away piece by piece. But before the rubble disappeared, fans gathered at the site, some clutching original ticket stubs, others bringing flowers. They marked the ground as sacred, insisting it should never be forgotten. Today, a bronze plaque stands near the spot where the stage once stood. Its inscription is simple. Elvis Presley performed his final concert here on June 26, 1977. The plaque is polished often by the hands of visitors, its letters worn smooth by decades of touch. For fans, it is not just a marker, it is a gravestone for a night that changed forever the way Elvis was remembered, and the ripples extend even further. Tribute shows continue to honor that performance, not for its technical perfection, but for its vulnerability. Documentaries play the grainy footage, pausing on his sweat-soaked brow and trembling hands. Writers describe the hush of the arena, the eruption of applause, the sense of shared fragility. The legend is no longer just the man who electrified television in 1956, but also the man who bared his humanity in 1977, Pattern Breaker. What happened in Market Square Arena was not an ending. It was a revelation. For the fans who were there, the memory became a personal compass. They told their children and grandchildren, "I was there the night Elvis showed us his truth." Each retelling kept the moment alive, passing it from generation to generation, and that memory reshaped how his legend would be told. The hidden truth of that night was not weakness, it was courage. In his final performance, Elvis Presley revealed something audiences had rarely seen: his fragility, his struggle, and his determination to give everything despite both. It was not rhinestones or choreography that left the arena changed forever. It was honesty. 18,000 people witnessed a man who refused to hide behind perfection. His voice cracked, his hands shook, yet he stood, he played, and he sang until the final note. And in doing so, he offered the greatest gift an artist can give: himself. Unguarded and true. Reflective question: isn't that what makes a legend? Not invincibility, but the bravery to be human in front of us all. That night in Indianapolis, Elvis showed the world that greatness is not measured in flawless notes, but in the willingness to pour out every last ounce of heart. And that is why his legend endures, not only as the king of rock and roll, but as a man who dared to let the world see his truth. Elvis's last concert wasn't about grandeur, it was about truth, vulnerability, and the courage to keep giving. If this story touched you, share it with someone who still remembers him, or someone who never knew. How would you have felt in that arena? Leave your thoughts below.